What are 3 ways the New York Giants offense can improve in 2023? We'll tell you about it next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And on today's podcast, we're going to take a look at 3 areas in which the New York Giants offense can get better in for 2023. Now, there's probably more than 3, but these are the 3 that, when I was going over the Giants offense, these are the 3 that really stood out to me for one reason or another. So we'll go through each of them. And at the end of the pod, we'll talk about how this kind of shapes their needs on offense. We know what some of them are, but we'll try and prioritize them based on some of these statistics that I was able to dig up. All right. So first up, that I think needs to improve. Now, this kind of blew my mind when I went and I tallied up everything and did the research. As we know, the Giants finished 9-7-1. They made the playoffs. All right. Nobody's complaining about that. Nobody's complaining about the 1-loss record, which was a nice change considering what the Giants have done in the past. But here's the interesting thing. The Giants were outscored in the regular season, 371 points to 365. Now, that's not a huge swing. That's not a huge differential. But the point is if this Giants offense wants to ascend and be a top echelon group, they're going to have to outscore their opponents by the end of end of the day. There were some blowouts, obviously, but the Giants are going to have to figure out a way to tilt that, so that they end up outscoring the opponents at the end of the season. All right, some additional numbers. The Giants were 10th in red zone conversions for touchdowns only. That wasn't a problem. They were very good in the red zone. But here's where I think the problem was for the Giants, amongst other places. They had trouble getting into the red zone. All right. So I went back and I did a manual count. The Giants had 179 scoring drives total in the regular season. And of those, only 44 ended up in the red zone. That's not a really good percentage if you think about it. So if you're the Giants, you want to get in the red zone a lot more. Make it easier for your offense to score. Give your kicker chip shots. There wasn't enough opportunities. It was almost like the reverse of what they went through the year prior when they would get to the red zone and they wouldn't be able to score. They'd have to settle for field goals. So as a result, the Giants were ranked 20th in red zone opportunities per game, right? They averaged 2.8 per game. Not really good. You want to be averaging a lot more than that. So if you figure that the average game, the team has maybe 10 scoring drives or 10 offensive possessions, and you're only, getting into the red zone on 2.8 of those, yikes, not a good stat at all. The last thing I'll say about the offense and just the struggles that it had is that, in the beginning of the year, and we kind of all figured this would be the case, but in the beginning of the year, the run game carried the offense, which we figured would be the case. Again, Saquon Barkley looked good in summer. The run game, the run blocking was better. The passing game had to come along. And what happened was the Giants leaned heavily on the run game, which, again, not a surprise, until teams started to really figure out how to slow them down. And that's when the Giants had to kick into the passing game a little bit more. And what you started to see with the passing game, especially after, Kenny Golladay didn't pan out. Sterling Shepard got hurt. Kadarius Toney got shipped out of here. Wan'Dale Robinson got hurt. What you started to see was sort of a reminder of the West Coast offense. There was a lot of short passes thrown by Daniel Jones. And I'm going to talk about, deep downfield passing a little later on in the program, but I can't help but wonder if Daniel Jones was coached to look at, the short stuff first and then see what was down the field. I think that was the case, so when the coaches, they always used to say that Daniel did everything he was asked to do. I suspect they had him play that conservative game to kind of give him confidence, number one, and also to kind of give the offense, an opportunity to kind of gel together and get into sync with one another. So, scoring is definitely something that the Giants are going to have to take a look at. I've spoken in the past about how ideally you as an offense probably want to score at least 25 points a game. I mean, you look at the two Super Bowl teams. The Chiefs averaged 29.2 points per game. The Eagles, 28.1 points per game. Then you had Buffalo, who was a playoff team, 28.4. They were second. Dallas, 27.5. They were ranked fourth. All right. The Giants, what did they average per game point-wise? 21.5, which means scoring was really hard to come by. So scoring is definitely number one on the list of things that the Giants have to figure out how to do better in 2023. All right, what's next on the list? I'll tell you right after this. Hey, Giant fans, the NFL season might be over, but the NBA season is in full swing. And now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 if their first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to the spread and more. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey, Giant fans, don't forget to check out the Locked On Giants podcast on Instagram at Locked On Giants. And be sure to follow me on Instagram as well at Patty Traina, PATTITRAINA. You'll find audio clips, interviews, factoids, all kinds of cool things. And then once we start off spring football, there'll be video clips from practices. So be sure to follow us on Instagram. That's Locked On Giants and at Patty Traina, PATTITRAINA. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Happy to have you with us on this Friday. Hope you're having a great week. And the weekend's almost here. Exciting, right? And actually, it's going to be the first weekend without football. Yikes. NFL football, by the way. I don't really count, the other stuff. So, I won't be tuning into that stuff. Not really interested per se. But anyway, we are running down 3 areas where the Giants offense needs to get better in 2023. We just talked about scoring. Let's talk about item number 2. And this kind of aligns with the idea of scoring, but quite simply, from a bigger perspective, the Giants need to be able to beat better defenses, right? If you look at their win-loss total, the games that they won, most of their victories came against defenses that just really weren't good. They weren't ranked in the top half of the league. The 2 exceptions for the Giants were Washington, who had the 7th best defense at the time, and Jacksonville, who had the 12th best. So, for the most part, the opposing defenses weren't powerhouses, but yet the Giants struggled. We all remember what the Eagles defense did to them in the first matchup in the regular season, and then again in the playoffs. You got to beat better defenses. Now, how can they do that? there's a couple of things that they could do. Number one, they've got to beef up that offensive line, specifically the interior of the offensive line. I think we can all agree that there was a little too much pressure that came up the gut at times with the offensive line. Ironically, though, people say, oh, John Feliciano, they've got to replace him. Yes, maybe for the long term, but Feliciano, according to ESPN, was the 10th best center in pass block win rate percentage. He had a 95% in pass blocking amongst centers. Hence why those of you who wondered why he was a Pro Bowl alternate, that's probably one reason why. Hence why those of you who are wondering why I think that they're going to keep him as opposed to Nick Gates, there's a reason why. But still, looking at the other part of the interior line, the guards, the play of the guards was just not very good. First off, at left guard, you had that revolving door because of injuries. It was supposed to be Shane Lemieux, and he got hurt. Then Ben Bredesen stepped in, and he played well for what it's worth. But then he got hurt, and then you had Joshua Zudu rotating in. He was a rookie. It just, then Nick Gates took snaps there. They never really had any kind of stability there. And ideally, you want to have stability. Now, thankfully, it didn't affect Andrew Thomas, because sometimes the guy who you're playing next to can affect what you do if you're an offensive lineman. And we actually saw that on the right side, I think, because on the right side, Evan Neal, the right tackle, had his struggles. And Mark Lewinsky, the right guard, battled, but he had struggles too. And it's fair to ask, it's fair to wonder, I think, how much did Neal's struggles affect Lewinsky's performance? The coaches might know. They'll never say, but it's certainly fair to wonder if that was a factor. So definitely, I think, for the long term, got to address the interior of the offensive line. Settle that left guard spot, number one. Right guard, Lewinsky's under contract for another 2 years, I believe. I think he's got guaranteed money coming in 2023. So I don't think they're going to move him out of there, although he does have a per roster bonus. But start looking to beef up the interior. Get yourself your long-term guys. And that includes at center. Get a young center in there, a guy preferably who has played center for his college team, not a converted guard, and get him ready. Because eventually, Feliciano, they're going to move on from him, assuming that they resign him. Get a guard in here. I think they want Joshua Zudu to ultimately be the left guard if he is able to come back from that neck injury that he had. But what about at right guard? Who's going to replace Lewinsky? Do they have somebody in the pipeline? I'm not so sure they do. So obviously, beefing up the interior of the offensive line is going to help. Now, another thing that is going to help with beating better defenses is getting a wide receiver, a true X receiver, AKA a number one receiver, because the Giants just didn't have it this year. And here's why having a legitimate number one receiver is so important, despite what, people might say. Even though the Giants offense is set up to where you're going to have different guys be featured in the offense. 1 week it might be Saquon, 1 week it might be Hodgins, 1 week it might be Bellinger. Having a number one receiver now changes the complexion against these better defenses, meaning that they have to devote more resources to the Giants offense, to that specific one receiver, right? That now creates favorable matchups for the other skill position players to take advantage of. The Giants just didn't have that. It was like, okay, everybody barrel down on Saquon Barkley, take him out of the game and let the Giants beat us with their receivers. And they did. A lot of times the defenses they dared the Giants to beat them with their receivers once they took Saquon out of the picture, and the Giants weren't able to do it. So getting a number one receiver is going to help tremendously. And for proof of that, go back to the days when, to 2018, when they had, or actually go back even further. Hakeem Nicks, when he was there, helped with the running game. Odell Beckham Jr., when he was here in his prime, he helped out with that. Now the drawback, what the Giants have to avoid is they can't over rely on one player, which is what they basically did with Saquon. They pretty much over relied on him. Saquon's one guy. And assuming he comes back, you can't put it all on his shoulders. So getting a number one receiver, I think, will definitely help the Giants in being able to beat better defenses moving forward, because now they're going to give those defenses headaches to worry about at the end of the day. All right. What is item number 3 on my list? Tell you right after this. Hey, Giant fans, free agency is right around the corner. It'll be here before we know it. And it's going to be interesting to follow the moves that General Manager Joe Schoen makes as he reshapes the Giants franchise for 2023. And speaking of general managers, if you think you have what it takes to be the ultimate football GM, then you need to check out the Ultimate GM game. This game allows you to manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through seasons, and lead your team through glory, trying to build a dynasty. Decide on your coaches, your coordinators, trades, free agents, and the draft. And best of all, you do all of this in a realistic game world that is free and playable offline, where you can compete against your friends. You can play on the go as you want and when you want. And we have, at the Locked On Network, have created a Locked On League for you to compete against Locked On fans all over the world. Can you be the ultimate GM? Choose Locked On League in the app to join us and show us what you got. And right now, Locked On Giants listeners can get a 100% free boost to their franchise. All you have to do is enter the promo code, which is in all caps, Locked On, in the game store. Again, that's promo code Locked On. To download the game, simply go to ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. Again, that website is ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM, start your dynasty today. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And before we get to item number 3, on the list of what the Giants offense can improve in 2023. Just a quick announcement. Next week, we are doing Locked On Giants Live, Tana, Traina, and Dog. Yep, we're getting better. We're getting the band back together. And the focus of that show is going to be salary cap. We'll be able to take your questions, talk salary cap. We'll also talk a little bit about the roster rebuild process and, anything else that's Giants related. But the band is getting back together. I think the show is going to be Thursday. I will know for certain, hopefully over the weekend, and then I'll be able to post something on YouTube as to when you can expect to jump in on the Locked On Giants Live, if, of course, you want to. Hopefully you will. Also, for those of you who might have missed it, yesterday I did sort of a salary cap show you might want to check out. Basically, what I did was I looked at contracts for Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley, but I also gave you a little overview of different mechanisms that go into building a salary cap friendly contract. So if you didn't see that podcast or hear that podcast, I encourage you to check it out. And also I encourage you, if you can, to watch it on YouTube, because I did put some visuals up there that unfortunately you can't really see if you're listening to the program on the audio platforms, but hopefully it all makes sense. And if you have questions, like I said, show up at Locked On Giants Live, and I'll try and answer them as best as I can. So, all right, let's get back to the order of business, which is, what can the Giants offense do to improve in 2023? The third item on my list is more downfield passing. All right, not a big secret, but let me give you some numbers, okay? The Giants finished last in the league in passes of 20 or more yards completed, otherwise known as big play passes. They had 28 big play passes of 20 or more yards, all right? Dead last in the league. They gave up the 5th most sacks in the league, 49. The yards per pass attempt which is a key statistic to kind of gauge what the quarterback is, how deep the quarterback is throwing. 6.8 yards per pass attempt, which was tied for 14th amongst quarterbacks who took 50% of their team's snaps. The intended air yards, 6.3 yards per attempt, lowest in the NFL. And the converted air yards, 4.9, third lowest in the NFL. Do I need to say any more? The Giants just didn't take a lot of deep shots. Now, again, part of that was probably due to the pass protection, which wasn't always stable, as evidenced by that 49 sacks. And I think they had over 212 total quarterback pressures, according to Pro Football Focus. So maybe the opportunities weren't there. And then as I also mentioned earlier in the show, the Giants offense was set up so that Daniel Jones threw from low to high, meaning he took the underneath stuff first, the short yardage stuff, then the intermediate stuff, and then if something deep was there down the field, then he took that stuff. So not a whole lot of deep downfield passing. Ideally, what you want to kind of see, I think, from this offense to give them a better chance of, opening things up, is you probably want to see more of the intermediate range stuff, like the 10 to 19 yard passes. That ultimately can loosen things up, because what was happening is with the Giants not really testing the field, deep down the field, opposing defensive cornerbacks and secondaries basically had it easy. All right. Now, I get it. The Giants didn't have, a speed burner receiver. The closest thing they had was Darius Slayton, who I think averaged 12.8 yards, air yards per target. So that's where, having a number one receiver coming in and being able to contribute and stretch the defense, that's paramount. So with that said, if you're general manager Joe Schoen and you are restocking this offense, which definitely does need to be restocked a little bit, I think your priorities have to start with the offensive line, the interior of the offensive line, because you want to protect your quarterback, obviously, because if you don't protect your quarterback, if you're not run blocking, doesn't matter who you have as your skill position players. I think receiver is priority 1A behind offensive line, interior offensive line. And then I would put running back as the third most important position, regardless of what happens with Saquon Barkley. And here's why I say that. Even though, as of this recording, I think the Giants will resign Saquon Barkley, you still got to get a good number two, have a 1-2 punch. And that 1-2 punch, that second punch, cannot be your quarterback, in my opinion. I get it. Daniel Jones's legs are an asset. Totally agree with that. But I don't want to see him running for over 700 yards every year. I just don't. Because there were too many times last year he took a shot. And, I don't know about you, but I held my breath waiting for him to get up and be okay and walk it off. At some point, that's what you have running backs for. So, if Saquon if they're taking Saquon out of the game, have a good second running back to take some of the workload off of Saquon. All right. I mean, it shouldn't have to be the quarterback, in my opinion. I know some of you will disagree with that, and that's fine. But I would rather see the quarterback work from the pocket. And, if he needs to scramble, use his legs to buy time, fine. I don't want to see my quarterback running, as a runner, 4 or 5 times a game. That just puts me on edge, because we have seen what has happened when Daniel Jones has had to leave the lineup due to injury. We have seen what Daniel Jones looks like when he's nursing a lower body injury. A couple of years ago, he had the hamstring, then he had the high ankle sprain, and he becomes a sitting duck. That's why, if you go back to what I said earlier about winning from the pocket, that's why this is all so important, to just take that next step. Now, the good news, folks, Mike Kafka, as you know, is coming back, right? He wasn't hired for the Arizona Cardinals coaching job. Year 2 of the offense should be much better because everybody will be familiar with it. Everybody should be able to play faster, and they should be able to do a little bit more. I look at it as last year, 2022 was level 1 of this offense. Now in 2023, I expect to see level 2 and possibly a little bit of level 3 as they continue to build this offense up, as they continue to add players to this offense to really, take it to the next level. So again, many other things that the Giants offense can do to take their game to the next level, but those to me are the 3 most important things that I came up with when I was studying the offense, the stats, the outcome and whatnot. What do you think? Let me know. Drop me a line, put a comment in the box below if you're watching on YouTube. I'm always interested to hear what you guys and gals have to say. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, or watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Be sure to tune in next week. We'll have all new shows, including the aforementioned Locked On Giants Live. Details are coming. Until then, everybody have a great weekend. We will see you on Monday.